Hi everyone, it's Tamara here with another card making tutorial. This time I'm using the My Favourite Things stamp set Sweet Holiday Penguins. I'll be doing some simple but effective backgrounds so that you'll be able to mass produce a number of cards to send out this holiday season. The products I'll be using, as I mentioned, is the Sweet Holidays Penguins from My Favourite Things, and I'm just going to be using 2 images today, but you could use the whole set to create this. I'll also be using the Summer Waves Stencil. This is also perfect for making some snowbanks like I'm going to be using, and then I'm going to be using the SY Christmas Carols to use for the snowflakes. I've grabbed out some smooth white cardstock, just cut a little bit bigger to size for a stitch rectangle die that I'll cut out through my die cutting machine, and I'll attach that to my make art station and get our little stencil lined up with our little wave, which we'll be making into our snowbanks. So I'm just going to line that up and just pop the magnets down, and then we're just going to do some very quick ink blending with just one ink for this, and I'll be using the Spun Sugar Distress Oxide ink. I'm using my Ranger Dome Sponge applicators for this and going in quite heavily with the colour down the bottom where the stencil is, and just lightening my hand to fade out into that white cardstock, and I'll do exactly the same with the second panel. Now I've grabbed out my Misti and some scrap Copic Express cardstock that I have in my stash, and we're just going to pop our little penguins onto this to stamp up. I'm going to be using some Memento Tuxedo black ink because it works perfectly with Copic markers. So I'm just going to line that panel up in the bottom of my Misti, grab out my ink and just get these little penguins stamped up and pop down. Just making sure I press that down well, and we've got a really nice impression from the one stamping. Now you will note that I'll have all the colours in the top left hand corner as I colour. So I'm going to go in with the lightest colour first, so I'm going to keep the inside of our penguin white, but I'm wanting to add some shadowing. So I am using my C markers to add that shadow. So obviously under his beak we'll throw a shadow. I'm just going to have the light coming straight from the top, so either side of his face will be a little bit in shadow, as well as where our little wreath is, we'll also be throwing some shadows inside and also down the bottom. So we're now going to blend out that marker, so keeping a little bit of white space there to make sure that this still looks like it's white. So then we'll just grab out our colourless blender just to soften that out into that white cardstock. So you can see that it still looks white, but it's got that beautiful dimension added with those grey markers. Because these little penguins are in a chilly climate, I'm just going to add a little bit of rosy cheeks to the sides of their faces. So just adding my R21, blend that out with my R00, and then we'll go in with that lightest C00 marker just to smooth that out into our grey cardstock that we've got. So now I'm going to do the black portions of our penguin, so I'll just be using my C markers for this because it's quite a cool color, but adds like a lot of grey, kind of a grey black look to our penguins. So I'm just popping in where all the shadows will be, so under those little wings, and also where they'll be throwing some shadow, as well as I said, that light coming from the top. So I've got the main shadows coming up at the base of either side of his head and just up from his beak. So we'll blend that out with our C7 marker, just slowly working up to our white cardstock. And then our final marker in this combo is going to be C5. So I'm just going to do a lot of just 3 marker combos with this. So now I've fully colored that in for our highlight, and we'll finish coloring those wings and just the base of his little body down the bottom. And I've done the other one off camera, but I've used exactly the same colors for our little penguin with the candy cane. So we'll blend out his little beak. I'm just leaving a little bit of white space cardstock on the top of his beak so that it looks like there's a little bit of shine happening there. And now I'm just going to be dotting in some colors for that wreath because it is quite fine leaves, but we do want to add some color to this. So I'm going to be using the same colors that I'll be using for his little scarf. So I'm just going to dot those in around where all those little baubles are. And now I'm only going to use 2 colors. So my darkest color will be R59 for that little baubles. So, and then I'll just use a lighter color that I'll be using in my combo for the scarf and also the candy cane. So I'm only going to use the 2 colors, just trying to leave a little bit of white cardstock, but they are very small, so it might not be that easy to do that. So now I'm going in with that G marker. So BG99 is going to be our shadow color. So I'm just trying to offset it. So we're going to have a green and kind of reddy pink striped scarf. So I'm just going to slowly blend that out. They are quite small, so you could just really use 2 contrasting colors. So a dark color like I did for the baubles with 1 lighter color to blend out. But I wanted to kind of make sure that I was using the same kind of markers that I used for that wreath. So now I'm just blending that out, just leaving that little bit of highlight card stock there for our lightest color, which is going to be our YG91 for that green combo. It's just a lovely green combo. I do like this one. So we'll blend that out, and now we'll go in with our red marker. So I'm using that same dark marker I used for the baubles on the wreath, adding our shadow. So obviously at the base of the scarf where it folds down, but just underneath his neck, because obviously his little head will be throwing some shadow at the top. Blend that out with our RV34, and then our final color in this combo, our second last color is RV32, and our lightest color for our highlight is going to be RV11. So it's just kind of like a very pinky red color scheme that we're going to have. Now, before I start coloring anything else, I'm going to do a color of white for the stripes, but rather than just do it one offset, it's easy enough to just do 1 full color up with our C markers all over and allow that to dry, and then we can add our red stripes in. So it just makes it a lot quicker doing this because the red will cover that grey perfectly. Now while that dries, we'll start colouring up the hat. So we're going in with those same markers that we used for our other penguin scarf. So we see that little fluffy edge will throw a shadow as well as at the back of that little hat. So we'll blend that out with the RV34. Then we'll bring in that RV32 to blend that out. And then our highlight colour, as it was before, is the RV11. So now we'll do our little dots for our fluffy portions of his hat. So obviously at the very back and at the base will be in shadow. So I'll be using most of my darker colours at that back and bottom, and the same with that little bauble on the top. The next colour will be C1, so just doing little stippling dots over that fluffy portion of the hat. And then our final colour to blend out, this will be the C00. So again, concentrating on the shadow areas and just lightening your hand as we move further up. Now that that grey is dry on our candy cane, I'm going to go in now with our red stripes. So we can just go straight over that grey. So obviously I've got the light coming from the top left. So all our shadows will be on that right hand side of the candy cane until we kind of come around this curved portion. Then they're going to be on that kind of inner side. So we'll blend that out again. So the same combo for the hat and the scarf with our pinks. So you can just use the same markers, and this will make colouring up multiple cars a lot quicker. So our next one is the RV32, and then we'll bring in that highlight colour, the RV11, to finish off our little stripes in our candy cane. And that's all the colouring done for our little penguins. So I'm going to run these through separately through my die cutting machine. So I'm just going to cut them apart. And I've never actually used the dies for this stamp set. So I'm going to actually use my little cutters to cut them apart. So I'm just going to grab out the ones I need for now. So I'm just being very gentle in trimming those apart. These little snips work really well. I got these from Lawn Fawn. And I find out, so we don't need this present, but I'll cut that away and just snip that off. So to make sure it doesn't flick out, I just kind of wiggle it as I cut. So now I'm going to grab the coordinating dies with our penguins, and I've got my purple tape so that I can tape them down. So that's a nice low tack tape. And I find taping them down and running them through the die cutting machines, I always get a really good cut as long as I've lined it up perfectly. So I do find standing up a little bit and making sure that that's perfectly aligned before I'll grab out my Spellbinders die cutting machine. So you need the base, platform B, and your C plate. Pop our other plate on top and run that through our die cutting machine. And you'll see with that purple tape holding that little penguin in place, we get that perfect cut out penguin. So we'll just take off that purple tape. And now we've got our cute little penguin ready to go onto our front of our card. And I did the same with the other image. So I've allowed my ink blended panels to dry because we will be doing some heat embossing. So I've grabbed out my Misti stamping tool. We'll get that panel attached to the base. And I've grabbed out my SY Christmas Carol stamp set, and we're just going to use 3 of the snowflakes that come with that set. I'm going to strategically place them around where our little penguin will sit. So just lining that up, and our little penguins will just sit in that little corner on the left. And grabbed out my Versa watermark ink, and we'll give that a nice stamp, give it a little press. Now to make sure I've got enough ink on there for our heat embossing powder to grab onto, I'm going to give that a second stamp up, and I'm happy now with the amount of coverage there. I've grabbed my folded piece of white printer paper to catch the excess of my white heat embossing powder. So we'll give that a double coverage and a knockoff to get rid of any excess powder. Now I've preheated my heat tool, so I've gone in initially to the back to get rid of any stray particles that might be on the front and get that panel nice and melted. Now because we've got those snowflakes in our Misti in exactly the right spot, this is how you can do your mass production by just leaving things in there and doing each of your panels separately. Now I did forget to do my anti-static powder tool on my previous panel. Thankfully I didn't need it, but I would always err on the side of caution, so I did do it this time. And now we've got our second panel stamped up and ready to go, the same as our first. So we'll pop some powder onto that. So now that we have all our panels done with the first 2 stamps, I'm just going to add a couple of extra stamps onto the front. So I'm just going to use 2 of the smaller ones to go around that ink blending in just 2 other spots. So we'll just line them up and attach them to the front of our Misti door. I've not forgotten to add my anti-static powder tool this time, so we'll get that stamped up and use our Versa watermark ink. Double stamp that to get some nice impression. We'll grab out our folded piece of printer paper and again just get some of that heat embossing powder. I will do the actual heat embossing off camera because it's exactly the same as what I did before. Now I'm just going to be cutting a larger stitch rectangle frame with a pink cardstock that I had in my stash. So I'm just going to grab out my paper trimmer and just cut this to the size just a little bit bigger than our stitch rectangle die so that I can run this through our die cutting machine. So I'll just cut that apart, and I've now run that through. So now we've got our little white panel with our ink blending to sit on top of our pink panel. Now before we start attaching everything, I'm just going to use this Happy Merry Joyful Christmas stamp to stamp up our little card fronts. So again, it's great to be able to leave this in our Misti stamping tool. So I'm just going to line this up on the little snowbank. Just grab out my T-ruler. Sorry, I'm doing this off camera. Just make sure it's even on both sides. And I'm pretty happy with that. So we'll get that attached to our Misti front. Make sure that's locked in down the bottom. And I'm actually going to be using a smoky grey VersaFine ink today because I thought black might be a little bit harsh on all the softer colours that we're using for this actual card. So I'm going to give that a double stamp up. As you can see, it just gives that beautiful lighter grey look to our stamped card. And we'll grab out that second panel and do exactly the same thing. So I've allowed that time to dry while I cut my card bases, and now we're going to assemble everything. So I've got my images, my panels and my card bases all ready to go. So I'll grab out my glue and we'll get our little pink panel attached to our card base. So just give that a squeeze, get a good amount of glue coverage on our panel, move that out of the way and get that attached to our card front. And then we'll get that sitting under a book to dry. Once that's dry, I'll do the same thing with our white panel. Just get a bit of glue on and do the same amount of glue on that panel to attach to our pink panel. So once that's lined up, we're just going to line that up to make sure we've got an even border around all four sides. And again, just set that under a heavy book to dry. I've done the other card off screen, so while both of them are drying, I'm just going to get some foam tape on the back of our penguins. So I've grabbed out a bit of a roll of foam tape that I have in my stash, just going to put the right amount around their heads for the bigger sections. And then I'm going to grab out some little foam circles to attach to the candy cane and to that little bauble on the top of his hat. So now I've got that attached. We've also got one to the little side of this penguin, but I'm going to just trim up an edge because it's quite narrow and one of those little dots will be too big. So I've just cut off a little bit of the tape on that side and that fits perfectly. So I've already attached one of the penguins off camera. Now I'm just using my tweezers to line up our second guy, just making sure his feet are nice and straight, sitting on that snowbank, and give him a press down. And these are the finished cards for this tutorial. As you can see, you would be able to make multiple cards really quickly using this method. You know, the longest portion you would take would be the copic colouring. But again, if you use some simple images as these are, you'll be able to get them done up really quickly. I hope you've enjoyed this card making tutorial. If you have, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see any future videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.